All right, advanced biology lecture on basic chemistry. Our last lecture dealt with chemical bonding, and we looked at two very special types of chemical bonds. That was the ionic bond and the covalent bond. In the ionic bond, the electrons are being transferred, and in covalent bond, we saw electrons were being shared, and we were talking about valence electrons being shared. And we discussed in covalent bonding, we looked at single, double, and triple covalent bonds, and then we looked also at polar and nonpolar covalent bonds. And one molecule we focused on in general was the water molecule. And the water molecule is a polar covalent bond because the electrons are shared unequally between oxygen and the two hydrogen atoms. Oxygen has a much greater electronegativity value than do the two hydrogen atoms. Therefore, the electrons that are being shared between those atoms tend to spend more time around oxygen than they do hydrogen. And there we get a positive partial charge around the oxygen atom and a partial negative charge. As you can see here in the ball and stick model, you get the partial positive charge around hydrogen and the partial negative charge around the oxygen atom. Now, remember that polar bonds have charges on either end and often are attracted to each other. So when hydrogen is bonded to an electronegative atom, it becomes electropositive. And this causes it to become attracted to electronegative parts of the same or other molecules. And this is where we start to see our last type of bond called a hydrogen bond. And a hydrogen bond can occur between polar molecules. And here you see if you were to visualize the water molecules in a glass of water, this is how they would orient themselves. So here you see the one water molecule with two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen, and you see the partial positive charges at the hydrogen end, the partial negative charge at the oxygen end, and the partial negative from one atom is going to be attracted to the partial positive hydrogens to another atom. That attraction between the partial charges is what we call the hydrogen bond. Now, the hydrogen bond is a weaker bond than ionic bonds. So this allows the bonds to constantly be breaking and reforming. And you can picture that as a water molecule would flow. They're constantly being broken and reformed. So that is a hydrogen bond, and that is the force of attraction that would hold water molecules together. That would be a cohesive force. So when a water molecule is attracted to another water molecule, that is cohesion. So two like molecules attracted to one another, that is cohesion. The water molecule being attracted to something else would be adhesion. So because of polar covalent bonding and hydrogen bonding, what are some of the unique properties of water? We know that water is an essential molecule to life. All living things depend on water. So water molecules stick together, that is cohesion. The tendency of water molecules to cling together is due to the four hydrogen bonds that water can form between other water molecules. So cohesion contributes to water transport in plants. But it's also, if you were to drink water through a straw, it's how the water would be transported up through a straw. That's similar to how it would be transported in plants. We call this the cohesion-adhesion water transport hypothesis in plants. Now, why adhesion? Cohesion is the water molecule to water molecule. Adhesion will be the water molecule being attracted to another substance. So when you talk about water transport in plants, adhesion will be the water molecule being attracted to the walls of the plants. So it will be attracted to that vascular tissue that will help prevent the water column from breaking apart. So it's pulled up, kind of like in a vacuum, the water molecules will stick together and they are attracted to the sides of the plant tissue. That would be cohesion and adhesion. So here you could see water, of course, enters the plants through the roots. Then the water would travel in. So we'll look at types of transport later. So water would flow into the roots. The water molecules would cling together and adhere to the sides of the vessels, and they'd be pulled up through the trunk of the tree, up through the branches, out into the little stems, and then coming up into the leaf vein, and that is where when you look at, because you just did your leaf collection, you can look at the leaf venation and you can see the veins. So that is an organ of a plant, and you can see that the water comes in there, and water is necessary in leaves because that is where photosynthesis takes place. So what drives that process is as water evaporates, it pulls the water column from the roots to the leaves. So you have water that is evaporated from the leaves, and we'll talk about that a lot more when we get into photosynthesis, and that helps kind of create that suction force to pull water up the tree. Another great thing about water is that water can absorb a lot of energy, but only change its temperature very slightly. And when we talk about that, we say that calories, so you've heard the definition of a calorie before, maybe when you're talking about food. But scientifically, when you talk about a calorie is the amount of heat energy that is needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So water needs to absorb a lot of heat energy in order to change its temperature by 1 degree Celsius, or it needs to release a lot of heat energy in order to change its temperature by 1 degree Celsius. And that is a unique property of water. And that is a good thing for life, because if you walked out on a 120-degree day, your body would be heating up. And then that would, of course, affect homeostasis, and then in addition to that, metabolism. Or if you go out on a very cold day, you would start to move really slowly, and essentially, because our cells are mostly composed of water, and we'll discuss that when we get into cell structure function, we would freeze. But that doesn't happen. And that doesn't happen because water needs to absorb a lot of energy or release a lot of energy in order to change its temperature. So we say that water has a high heat of vaporization because so many hydrogen bonds must be broken in order to go to the next phase change. Water is also a universal solvent, and we did talk about this in our How Matter Behaves lab lecture. A solution contains dissolved substances called solutes, that which is dissolved. So water would be the solvent, salt could be a solute, and then the solute would dissolve in the solvent. Water's hydrogen bonds help to dissolve other polar molecules. Any molecule that is water-loving is considered hydrophilic, and those molecules form hydrogen bonds with water. Molecules that are not water-loving are water-fearing and are said to be hydrophobic. And these water molecules do not form hydrogen bonds with water. So you saw a hydrophobic condition when we mixed oil with water. So here we see if you were to take salt and dissolve it in water, here's how the chloride ions and the sodium ions would disassociate and be attracted to the water molecules. So the positively charged hydrogens would be attracted to the chlorine anion, and the negatively partially charged oxygens would be attracted to the sodium cation, and that would cause dissolving to take place. Another unique property of water is that frozen water is less dense than liquid water. Water is most dense at 4 degrees, so when water freezes, the crystal lattice expands, and this increases the volume, but it still has the same mass. The volume increases and the density decreases, and now you have a solid, which we call ice, that will float in the less denser liquid form of water. So here you can see it. If you look, ice is less dense than liquid water. On the y-axis, we have the density in grams per centimeter cube. We have 0.9, and then we have the density of 1.0. So we see that the ice lattice, we see that it's about 0.9, and then liquid water has a density of about 1.0 grams per centimeter cube, or you could say grams per milliliter. So you see that water is most dense to about 4 degrees Celsius, and then as the temperature rises, then you have, and actually would extend up a little bit, then it would go back up to 1.0 degrees Celsius, or 1.0 grams per centimeter cubed. So those are some unique properties of water. Water is also one of the only substances on planet Earth that could exist in a solid, liquid, and gaseous form. Our last part of the lecture is that living things require a narrow pH range, and this is one of the things that we need to maintain internally will be pH, that would be homeostatic conditions, in order for metabolism to take place. So acids and bases affect living things. When water ionizes, it releases equal amounts of hydrogen ions, H+, and hydroxide ions, OH-. So this is why pure water has a pH of 7, because the hydroxide ions are equal to the hydrogen ions. So some substances release more or fewer of each. An acid is any substance that releases excess hydrogen ions in solution, and a base is a substance that releases any excess hydroxide ions into solution. So here's the dissociation of water molecules, and you can see as water molecules dissociate, you get equal parts of hydrogen ions to hydroxide ions, and you have that pH of 7, which is neutral. If you add an acid, such as hydrogen chloride, you increase the hydrogen ion concentration, making the solution more acidic, so the pH is going to go below 7. If you add hydroxide ions, such as a strong base, NaOH, you're going to increase the hydroxide ion in solution, therefore decreasing the hydrogen ion in solution, and you are going to raise the pH above 7, making a base or alkaline. So the pH scale goes from 0 to 14. 7 is neutral. The greater the hydrogen ion concentration, the lower the pH, and the lower the hydrogen ion concentration, the higher the pH. So if you look at the pH scale, we have pure water and tears have a neutral pH of 7, and then you could see milk comes down between pH of 6 and 7. You have hydrochloric acid at about pH of 1, stomach acids at about pH of 1, lemon juice around a pH of 2. So those are all very strong acids. On the other end, you have sodium hydroxide around a pH of 14. Oven cleaner has a pH of about 13. And household ammonia has a pH of about 11. Also, seawater has a pH, and blood has a pH of around 8. So those are more alkaline or basic. So how does our body help regulate pH? Buffers are the things that our body uses to help regulate pH in body fluids and keep them relatively constant. A buffer is a system in which a combination of a weak acid and a weak base that helps prevent sudden changes, because they counteract strong acids and strong bases when an acid is dissolved in water. So buffers will help keep that balance. By binding or releasing hydrogen ions, it maintains that constant concentration of free hydrogen ions in the solution. That's a buffer system. And that's how the ocean buffer system works with calcium carbonate organisms, and when you talk about ocean acidification. So acid deposition has many harmful effects. Acid deposition is caused by air pollution, particularly from burning fossil fuels, and it acidifies rainwater. It can leach toxic aluminum and create methyl mercury in lakes. This destroys leaves, stopping photosynthesis and making trees susceptible to disease. It also increases respiratory diseases and erodes buildings and monuments. So that is it for Chapter 2. Have a great day.